Hello, everyone. So here we are back at BSL Blethers for our usual discussion. And this week, our topic will be, and it will be so interesting. It's going to be deaf intermediaries at court. And I'm Avro Hepner from the BDA. So we'll be talking about what is a deaf intermediary. Maybe some of you at home have never seen that word before, or know what happens. And where does it happen? It does happen within the UK. So I have the privilege of interviewing this person who will discuss all of this with us today. And just to let you know before we start, there may be some deaf people, some viewers at home. Although the topic is interesting, some of it can be quite sensitive. The subject, the topic matter, quite sensitive. So just prepare for that. And the information is so useful, but it can be sensitive. So I'm delighted to introduce our guest speaker today, and that's Craig Flynn. Hello, Craig. Hi, Avro. It's lovely to meet you, Craig. Likewise, Avro, and thank you for coming here today. You're welcome. Craig, could you give us a brief introduction about yourself? Maybe explain what a deaf intermediary is? Not a problem. Where do I begin? So I've been doing Deaf Relay before 1997, but when 1997 came along, the government we were looking for intermediaries. But I want to explain just before I move on what an intermediary is. I've been doing this job as a deaf intermediary for the last 26 years. And in the past, we've had different signs for it, as you can see that I'm using. We're talking about the same thing, but what we realised there was that deaf people naturally use this sign that I used for intermediary to describe the person who was going to court with them. So that's the sign for intermediary. Okay, you mentioned before that you were an intermediary for how many years? 26 after all. It's 26, a long time now. Originally, it was a pilot scheme for 3 years, and it was to look about how we could actually set this service up. And it was there was lots of evidence, high evidence, or substantial evidence that vulnerable people, for example, people maybe had learning difficulties, people who maybe had a brain injury or some brain damage, a deaf child. There were so many different categories and groups. And they arranged for 12 different professionals to come in, and I was the deaf professional. So I had the deaf hat on as part of this pilot. We did training for about 2 or 3 weeks to understand what we were doing, and we were all doing this training at the same time because what we had to do is see how we could fit in within a court system. So that was at the start. Um, and then, as I said, we did this pilot for 3 years. And before that, what we were doing in court was um, you were getting thrown out of court because they were saying that you were interrupting. And what was happening was that I suppose at the beginning we were all the guinea pigs because we had to understand the court system and where we were able to align with it and making sure that the law was being served in the courtroom. So I can't remember exactly, but I think it was about 2001. There was in the BBC News, it was about the House of Lords. Right, okay. And they made this announcement that approval had been given for the use of intermediaries in court. So the approval was given. So that was really the beginning that we were seen as a profession. Um, so the original question was, what is really an intermediary? So in the past, we were aware that deaf people, it could be someone who was accused, a victim, or a witness. Or someone like a really bad experience of court, that what had happened, or rather had a very bad experience or a traumatic thing had happened in their life, that when they got to the court, the the interpreters usually knew no information. The deaf people themselves would, sorry, excuse me, the deaf people would come to the court not understanding what was going on. They would see the interpreters, but they would maybe give descriptions of a person, and the description could be, well, the name, it's like the person could they maybe describe how they look, where they lived, and they could maybe say there's a farmer. And so you would think, how many farmers in Britain? So it would look like that deaf person was an unreliable witness, when in actual fact it was the language that was used. And that was not any interpreter's fault or anything like that. It was the language. So that was an example. Um, so at that instance, we thought, well, why don't you use a deaf intermediary, before that? Because this case, it kept getting dropped, but cases like this were getting dropped. We realised it because there was not an understanding of what was happening. So after the campaigning, this was set up. So how does it work? Well, what happens is that the police anywhere, whether the deaf person's a witness, victim, or accused, the police, and it has to go through the police process. The police themselves will decide if that deaf person requires a deaf intermediary, and only then will they refer the case to me. Now, if that's the case and the police want to interview now, that won't happen. I get to decide, because I have to interview and assess the person to make sure that they are taking 100% of the information in, not 95, not 93, 100%. So in practicality, how it works is I would maybe go to the deaf person's house or whatever, and I would come to the door, and obviously I would come with the police and interpreter as well. You know, um, so we're only, so that we get in there, we're only talking about specific things. So they'll maybe say, "Oh, you're deaf." "Yes, I'm deaf." "Yep." "Oh, how are you?" And then it's just really, we don't really talk about the incident. This is all about building rapport. So there's always a bit of nervousness. You can see someone's face, and that maybe a bit of trust. I mean, I'm a man, it could be a woman, and so, but I have to tell you, up in the 26 years, I've not had any issues. Obviously, if someone is Asian, a woman's Asian, then a man wouldn't be allowed. That's a cultural uh, respect, and that should be maintained. So my job really is to see whether, if this person is capable of understanding every process of the court. And then I would say, I'll come back next week, and I'd usually maybe put a wee joke and say something like, "You bring the biscuits or the tea," or something like that, the coffee, just so that when I'm leaving, there's that smile. I'll come back next week, and then I chap again the door, and you'll see a difference in the person. I'm now familiar. "Oh, hello, it's you again. Come on in." And you can actually see their confidence rising and the rapport becoming stronger. You know, so there'll be wee sort of jokes about, "Where's those biscuits?" and then "Have your tea." But always at the back of mind, I'm thinking, this is slowly, it's a step by step. You go at the person's time. So you just talk about everything in general until they're ready to discuss the instance. Now, obviously, the police would be there as well when that's happening. So then they would start to relay what had happened. So they would maybe say things like, the blue door, or the bus number was 152, or it was 7 o'clock. They would remember specific things, about the event. But what I would say to them is that the record that I've had is 11 times where I've went backwards and forwards with a person, trying to get them to understand. Sometimes it's just once and they get the concept. But remember, this could to do with emotional and nerves and everything else, so it can take a long time. So I then do an investigation between now and the trial. And my job is to be with that person every step of the way from now until the trial. So I get the opportunity to say, who is that person? Like maybe you're saying with the big fat cheek. Oh, and then maybe there's a photograph. Oh, who's that? Oh, that's my uncle. So there's techniques and ways that that if the deaf person would say, "Where's the blue door? What's that about?" I'll be able to ask, "See this blue door? Where's it next to?" They say, "Oh, it's near the fish and chip shop." All right. So what you're able to do is you're able to sort of navigate the information that's come from the deaf person in a way that the police can understand and ask the right questions. Absolutely. It really is. It's just making sure that all the information is given. Sometimes it can take 2 or 3 weeks, and that's all the prep done. And then we're ready for the official interview. And an interpreter will there, police will be there. There will be a recording tape for the police, and we'll have cameras there. Cameras are a necessity too, and then they will start to give their answers. So they might say blue door, right? And I mean, I'm not answering, but it could be the case of they say the blue door, and I will say that's the blue door at the fish and chip shop. So it's just to make sure that the information is clear and concise and accurate. Um, so another thing that like police love to ask is how long are you there? Now, deaf people will maybe say, "Oh, half an hour," but what they're meaning is they're saying when you arrived there, it's not when you were there the whole time when you arrived. I know what you mean, but what the police are asking, they're asking specific how long, say you were there, saw it, and then off. It was 3 minutes rather than you were there for half an hour. So, you know, that can become problematic because the deaf person's saying that to the question, they're saying, "Oh, I was there the whole time for half an hour," but the question was specifically from A to B. Got you. Right. So you're doing all the prep, making sure that you're getting all the information from the deaf person before we're getting to trial or court. But you mentioned earlier on that the police actually, they were the person or the authority that would decide if a deaf person needed a deaf intermediary. So my question is, how can the police decide? Ah, now this service that was set up is not just for deaf people. There's lots of other groups of people, people with protective characteristics as well that are in this group. So there is protection and there is guidance and policy for that, and that's how it works. So the police would say, for example, I was having to go to court soon. Can I go to the police and say, look, I really want a deaf intermediary? Yes, you can. You can. If I knew about the service. So we're fine about the service today. So there could be people at home that are looking and in that very situation and thinking, oh, that's something I could do with. Is it all over the UK? No, it's only in England and Wales at the moment. And how many intermediaries do you have? At the moment, there's 500, and there's only 2 or 3 deaf intermediates, so 500 intermediaries everywhere. And obviously, I'd left because I've retired, and there's a new system. So you don't do deaf intermediary anymore. No, I'm retired. That's right. Of course, you retired recently. It's only 3 or 4 months ago. So it's not a lot for the whole of England and Wales. I know, I know. Um, so could I ask, maybe I want to become a deaf intermediary, and I'm thinking that's a good thing for me. How do I apply? Do you go to the police? No, no, no. That you go to a website. It's the Ministry of Justice website, and if you look down, click down, you will see, or just type in intermediaries, and then you can apply. And it's not an easy system. So entry, do you have an interview? Do you must have certain criteria? With I'm assuming you must have a very high standard of English. Yes, it's absolutely appropriate that you have good English and good abilities to translate. And it could be maybe one of the interpreters is just maybe stuck with this translation. So you should be able to work in that mindset. Um, you have to read testimony, you have to read lots of things and understand that. Okay, so to get entry, what's the sort of qualifications or criteria? What do you need? Do you need so many years experience? Is there a process? Can you give us a bit of detail? Qualifications, um, you have to have academic qualifications above a standard. So, for example, you must have a degree or an MBA, and that can be in anything. That's how it works at the moment. So it is hard to get into. So you must be degree standard. So I suppose you were lucky at the time when you got in, but now it's much more difficult. Well, I was managing and sort of and being the coordinator for the deaf community for the service for 25 years. So you're looking for things that are matching that. But I believe the qualifications, you can go through the qualification academic route, but there may be another route. I'm not sure at the moment. That's great. I just want to clarify with you, Craig. You've explained what an intermediary does in court, how they prepare, or rather, how they prepare before court. But once we actually get to court, you've already established a relationship with the victim, the witness, or the accused from the start of that journey to court. That's correct. Yes. So I'm just wondering, is that the same as a relay interpreter? Can you have a relay interpreter as well as an intermediary? No, Avro. Honestly, it's not. It's very different. I'll go back and I'll explain it. Uh, you, as an intermediary, you get access to documents that a relay interpreter wouldn't necessarily need to see or have access to, and I'm there right at the beginning. So, um, you y really an interpreters turn up at court and there doesn't have to be a bond and it's not something that they would look for. They would look for that distance. But in my role, they're looking for a rapport, a trust and an understanding to ensure that person understands. So, right, I'm getting you, right? So you've been with the person up to trial, you get into court, we still have interpreters, that's fine. But we don't need a deaf relay because so you're saying it's not necessary because if I'm here as a deaf intermediary, then I can cover that aspect of relay, which I will work with the interpreters. So it's not necessary. It's not that the function's redundant, it's just the function is being placed somewhere else. So for example, uh, I would work with the interpreters as well and come to interpreters just to make sure everything was said correctly. Right, okay. So I'm trying to get my head around this. So you've been doing this for 20, 30 years, 25, 26, Avro. Have you been working with children, males, females, Avro, from the age of 4 to 95? That's how widespread the client group is. And it could so really any age at all. Women, men, anyone. Uh, If you had any experience of having maybe a long case at course, 6 months, I was there involved 6 months. Whoa! And that was through the whole thing. Yep. And I can never forget that the barrister was questioning the person. It's called cross examination and was accusing the witness of lying. And were 34 days that person was on the stand, and they broke a record for that. I was worn out, but we were making sure we were getting accuracy. Now, you said that you covered the whole of England and Wales. That's correct. Um, but Northern Ireland is not covered. That's correct, Avril. That's interesting because the reason I was asking you to come here today is because the BDA Scotland, the work that we do is that we've noticed that Scotland doesn't have this. And we know that the Justice Project and the Justice Department, they're really keen to look at solutions. So I know that a lot of people in Scotland, deaf people, will have been to court for various reasons, and things have not went well because of the frustration of lack of understanding or lack of accuracy. So I'm sure there's people out there that have had that experience. So maybe there's something for Scotland to think about. I know they're interested. I saw recently in a mental health consultation recently, we were asked to comment on what we thought about intermediaries. So hopefully something will happen. So I don't think it's blocked in Scotland. I think we're just still at the discussion page. I've just put my eye to the side and there is so many comments. I will try my best to pick some of the questions. Before you do that, Avril, could I just explain that see when we get to court, all of this has been explained to everybody in the court, so all the people involved in the court beforehand, so nothing's new. Great. Okay, I've got a question for you. It's a question from Linda Richards. And Linda's question is, so can the deaf intermediary advise in the interpretation in court? For example, if there's been a misinterpretation or a poor interpretation, can the intermediary report this? So could you answer that, Craig? So if maybe the deaf person's not clear or do you feel the interpretation is not around, the intermediary is not allowed to advise or get involved. We're only there to communicate with the client. That is my whole service. It's all about the information, and I'm monitoring to make sure the person is picking up that information. So, for example, say a question was happening and I'm checking and I'm thinking, no, I interrupt and I say, no, they're not talking about that. They're talking about what time you arrive, for example. Then the deaf person can say, I'm not advising, I'm just being specific and making sure that they understood. So I'm not an interpreter. The interpreter's job is to translate, but I have to make sure that deaf person understands what they're saying and the context that they're saying it in. Okay, thank you, Craig. Again, another question from Linda, and this is linked with the police station. As I suppose it's the same question is if you're at the police station, so we're not in court, we're not at trial yet or anything, but can you advise on the interpretation within the police station? Can you give any guidance? Again, it's all about my role is to make sure that everything goes smooth. So if an interpreter that I've already met before, I've already given them the background, all the background information from A to Z. So they should know the story. They should know that this sign meant bill and everything else. So I would be working with the interpreter beforehand. And that's what happens. And most of the time, if it's, I will look for certain interpreters beforehand and I'll make sure that I've got them way before so that they can understand everything that that person's using in their language. And they also know my role as well. Okay, if you were at a police station or court, Craig, for that matter, and say you saw the interpreter was not very good at all. I mean, really, I mean, we're lucky. We have good interpreters there, but say something happened and someone slipped through the net, would you have the power to stop that? Yes, but I always talk to people beforehand, so the power would have been before we got to the trial. I would say all that beforehand. I would tell them I am not happy. I would say as an intermediary, I'm not happy because I know the client and I know if that client would be able to understand that interpreter's way of presenting information. But if it's in court, you still, oh no, you can do it. It's happened many times because I'm responsible to make sure that everything goes smooth. So yes, if I don't think my client's understanding, then the interpreter can be asked to be removed. So Claire Marie is asking the question, so how long does it take to become qualified? You'd mentioned some training before you'd been through, was it 3 years training? I can't remember. Was that right? Yeah. Ah, I'm qualified counsellor. So, and I've got academic qualifications. So I was 3 years, I've got a degree. So that's what it goes back to. You need to have an academic qualification and obviously a qualification that you think will be appropriate. But remember, when we arrive, when we started all those years ago, we were the guinea pigs. We were compiling the do's and the don'ts by doing all the do's and the don'ts. How long did it take of the sort of training? I think it was maybe a good few months, but also it was understanding processes and things as well. So I suppose to answer your question, Claire, um, the Ministry of Justice website, they have all the criteria, qualification, and the trainings there. So that might be your best port of call. I think my understanding at the moment, the system is it's like maybe there's maybe an interview, they check about your background, maybe check your English skills. It is very different than before. It is much more strict, and that's great. That's a really good thing. I don't know. There was maybe something else. I'm not sure, but that's great. I'm just having a look at the questions. So we've answered that one. Linda is asking a question. Am I allowed to choose my deaf intermediary? Does the deaf person get that choice? Oh, yes, absolutely. So if they could say, I really don't want him, I would want someone else, absolutely. We always include when any first meetings is that we just check, are you happy? I'm a man, would you prefer a woman? It's not a problem, and to be honest, uh, it's always about the communication. People tend to look see whether if it's the understanding, if we can understand each other, then that's the most important fit. And it's all about respect. There's some women that maybe have a different culture and they would prefer a woman come in, and that's absolutely fine because we're only there to make sure all the information is explained accurately. Okay. Another question, they're coming in fast and furious. Craig, do you think that deaf intermediaries is really are important? Do you think they're necessary? Oh, absolutely. Why? Well, the simple reason is because that when you're in that situation, you will realize that that person usually knows nothing about the process, about what happens in court or anything else. But when I'm there and they get the sign, they feel confident. So, for example, say for example, we're at court and there's the jury there. It's a jury trial, and the interpreter's giving all this information out. And the maybe they say, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake." The interpreter, "I've made an error. Could you go back and clarify that?" That can happen. Well, I can then say, right, I can check what they're looking for, and I can say to the person, look, that. Now the jury's watching, their barrister's watching, and they'll always do things like that. That information's wrong. That they'll try and say things, this information's wrong, or that's not right. What are you talking about? the barrister for the defence will always try and find any fault in anything that person say. So you feel that it's important for the deaf intermediary to be there? Yeah, absolutely. The deaf intermediary is the person, the linchpin that keeps both things running smoothly. The interpreter's already done their job. They've done it. We've worked with interpreters beforehand, so the interpreters know what they're doing. Interpreters are confident. We're all confident with the interpreter. So it's not a communication issue. This is just a tactic and a technique that's used by the defence. But going back to the deaf person, it's essentially have it. Without that, they would be lost in the whole system. Okay, so being an intermediary and you've been through maybe a court process, a trial or whatever, then what? What happens after that? Is that person, hello, cheerio, bye-bye? No, 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 no. No, no, no. It's not one of those things. You don't just say that's it, finished. Um, so whether it's successful or not, it's finished at that stage. That's our job. That's the rules. So just to recap, as soon as everything's all finished at court, that's it, finished. My job is done. I don't get to phone back and check how someone is. It's just that's my job done. Okay, another question. What happens if there's a conflict of interest and people know you? It can happen. It can happen often. You just change who it is. It has to. You have to be honest. If there's a conflict, you have to be honest. And Craig, do you feel that intermediaries, well, that most people have had their experience using a deaf intermediary, or if you get any examples of being deaf, what's the difference between or harder with adults or children? He says working with children, it's as you can imagine, it can be really, really quite difficult. So you would maybe arrive at the school, for example, or whatever sign for school is, and they maybe don't have no language, not enough language. They maybe had a cochlear implant and just been left to talk, but they're in a classroom assistant who's hearing, doesn't sign, and for me, the classroom assistant who can't sign, what's the point of it? Anyway, so I'm coming in there to build a report, and there's not even any communication. Interpreter can't do a voiceover because the person's not given any communication. So I would then be responsible to tell the police this person has no language. And it's happened to me a few times where the police have agreed that I should meet the person for 10 weeks. We should meet. And it's 10 weeks and it does make a difference. You would be surprised. Uh, so I would start off with saying, my name's C for Craig, you, and then building that rapport and building some language and also seeing how much language they have hidden there. And then we would introduce maybe things like time or have language later. So then we would start with very simple questions I'm just making this up, right? So say it was the stepfather. You say, "Do you like him?" And you go, "No, no, no, don't like." So then "Why is that?" "No, no, no, I had a friend, I don't like him." That's information. That's key information. That's very, very powerful information. So it's my decision uh, to put that information down there. Ah, and it doesn't matter if the person's age 4 or whatever, that can help. So I suppose children are more difficult because maybe their language comprehension is not as developed as adults as well. Makes sense. I mean, what about any deaf people? Maybe they're older, maybe have dementia. Well, my oldest client was 95. Um, and at the end, we achieved nothing because he'd passed away. But for me, it was at least we tried, unfortunately. But before all of that, we've had some really good results. People have felt empowered and felt they've understood. Could we go back to, let me think. There's this question in the back of my head, and it's about the intermediaries with whether at the police station or rather at the police station, the police decide that there's an intermediary is necessary. But I mean, honestly, I just think if police can't sign and don't know anything about deaf community, how are they even equipped to make that decision? How does it happen? Avril, what I should have said was the police have already been trained. They've been trained with using interpreters, but they've also been trained with using intermediaries, and they know the difference. And that's why it's the police decision. And to be honest, there's a lot of police will refer. So, say for example, a police officer had decided that needed an intermediary, and then you appear and you think, no, they're fine. Their sign is absolutely fine, and their communication's fine. Their understanding's fine. What do you do then? It's a very good question, Avril. Because I have met many deaf people who were very defensive. They didn't want it, and especially uh, they want. Like, a lot of police maybe don't want you there. A lot of defence barristers don't want you there. So but a lot of deaf people, in my opinion, and a lot of deaf people who are very, very bright will still have a deaf intermediary because it's about safety as well. You feel comfortable. I mean, I'll be honest with you, if I was up at court for anything, I would have a deaf intermediary. Even although I understand the process, once you're in that emotional state, things are different. I'm trying to think of a situation. Say, for example, a deaf person went to court, and let's say you were the deaf intermediary, Craig, but I also needed additional support. Maybe someone that I felt that I know you're the professional, so but it's maybe someone, maybe my own support worker, or I mean, it could be that person could be an amazing interpreter, or it could be anybody, someone that you trust, and you think, could they say to the intermediary, I don't think that person they should be there, or they should be there. What is the relationship? Do you have that power? Well, to be honest, courts around the country always make sure that the interpreters are not involved in any court proceedings beforehand, because it's not appropriate, because you can give out information and things like that. And it's the same when you're doing interview at a police station. It's different interpreters when you get to court. Right. So do you make the decision? Well, I'm with the person, as I said, from the whole of the journey. The interpreters aren't. So having family and friends around, it won't happen. I'll be the one that will be with them the whole time. But I understand if any deaf person wants someone there, I can understand that, and I understand the reason, but the rules don't allow for it, unfortunately. So that it can't happen. So maybe somebody, I want to be with my mum. They said, you know, I can understand it, but I can totally empathise how, a child of the parent, or a parent of a child, how they would want to be there to support. But how it works in the court, if mum was there, they would try and say she's influenced the child, and that's problematic. Okay, so we know what a relay interpreter is, we know what an deaf intermediary is, and we've also got advocacy, deaf advocates, and they're there. Do they have any power? They're only there in the court system. It's the deaf intermediary that has more power. Is that correct? Absolutely. And also, just to let you know, it's allowed for an advocate to come with someone. Um, but but as again, I am there to make sure that everything runs smoothly for the court, to make sure that everybody understands. Another question for you, Craig, and this question is from Catherine White. So, you can read the question. How do you persuade the legal system to employ a deaf intermediary? How would you go about that, Craig? Oh, that's a good one. Employing a deaf intermediary, it's you won't be able to employ the Ministry of Justice. They have the procurement for that. They have the responsibility. They make sure that the people are trained and qualified, and then they're allowed to go and do the job in court. So I suppose Catherine's question is that we really need to encourage the legal system to engage more deaf mediary services, make them understand the benefits and how much easier it would be in the court. Absolutely, it would be wonderful if we could have loads of deaf intermediaries on our books. I mean, I know you've mentioned this happens in England and Wales, and the courts do they accept having intermediaries there or what? Interesting, Avril. Family court. The judge then always must have an intermediary there. It just has to at family court. And the reason behind that is because it's to ensure fairness and everything else. We don't want people saying, "Oh, the the defence saying, "Oh, the interpreter was rubbish. That's why what's happening causing mistrial." So in family court, we want to avoid any of that. So there will always be a deaf intermediary right from the beginning, just to make sure that before we get to trial, that there's no issues that I need resolved. And any issues I need resolved are the same issues that the deaf client needs resolved. And I'll be the one that would do all of that. So the judge has a good relationship with the deaf intermediary. Oh, absolutely, Avril. Yep, and asks me lots of questions, always and expected. Fantastic. Still looking at these questions. There's so many to choose from. Uh, there's a question from Tony Barlow, and there's a question that's popped up on your screen. So, does intermediaries replace or no, no, no. What happens is it doesn't change the need for an appropriate adult. Um, I have no issues in saying to the appropriate adult to say there is no point in you being here. You can't sign. So, yeah. Well, as I said, there's guidelines there that the police have that say that what a deaf intermediate can do. So what it means is an appropriate adult can be there, yes. And the police will just do this automatically, and then when we arrive, we would see whether it was appropriate or not. Yeah, it's not a choice thing that you get. I mean, if the police have got and can't sign, I would say to the police, there's no point here. So that would be fine. There's a question that's came in from Emma Ferguson Coleman. And Emma's question is, when you go to court, do you have your own interpreter? I do. I have my own access to work interpreter because I need that interpreter to be my ears when we're in court. I need that interpreter to listen to what's happening, and I need them to have an understanding, a very, very good knowledge of what the whole situation is in the court. So the interpreter will obviously voice for me. Um, and it could be that the you've maybe said something and then the interpreter said, look, that's not the information. So that would be telling me that, and then I can then tell the client, oh, that's interesting. But the other thing is outside the court with the barrister, it's a confidential discussion. we would never use the interpreter for the court, so we'd use my interpreter. Right, because my barrister would be saying to my client, "Don't say this or don't say that." Okay, just for clarify, so you've got that's great access to work. Fund this. So you employ an interpreter. Is that someone that you would say needs to have a really good legal background? It is rare, but there are a few interpreters dotted about that have got some knowledge in legal issues, but they have to totally understand and be responsible and respect the systems. They must be able to do that. The second thing is I need a good attitude. I need a rapport with that person. We're working together as a team. And also, I'm looking for them for understanding and accuracy of reading court documents and giving me the right information. So you may be looking for an interpreter with a law background. Oh yeah, that would just be absolutely ideal. So the interpreters, do they have to be registered with a special board? Yeah, yeah, yeah. They have to be with the registered with the police as being a legal interpreter as well. Absolutely. I'm just thinking of a situation in court. So you would arrive at court, you'd have your own interpreter, the court would have its interpreter, you've got your client, yeah, your interpreter. So what about where does the client look? Who does she or she sign to? Right, okay. Well, I'm there between the client and the interpreter. So I would say to the barrister, come here a wee second. He would lean over and I would say, what's that about? Because my interpreter's telling me what's going on. He says, look, they're going too fast. You need to calm down. So that interpreter would tell me. So my interpreter, as I say, they're my eyes and ears, or rather my ears, sorry, for what's going on and what they're finding is happening. Um, so it's the case of because there's three interpreters in court. That's fine for the court, but my interpreter's paid from access to work. Okay, there's more questions coming in. It was very interesting about access to work. We have another question in from Sophia, and this is Sophia's question. Does the deaf intermediary cease its relationship when even when the client decides to appeal the decision? So, maybe we get to the end and they've not got the decision they wanted, but they can get an appeal. So, yeah, that happens many, many times. And it's the barrister who will say, I feel this is wrong. We need to appeal. So we carry on. So that relationship is still maintained. And as I said, particularly in family court. Okay. So, just to repeat that again, Craig, so if you're going through an appeal, you would still maintain that relationship? Absolutely, because we've already been there from the start. We've started from scratch. It would be foolish for loads of reasons to switch anything. So, yeah, we would keep on. There's another question that's come in, and it's Christopher Plummer. And Christopher's question is, when you're in court, does the deaf person or do you have the role to say that you don't want that particular interpreter? Maybe you don't like that interpreter. Can you say that? Absolutely, I can. How does that work? Who has the right? It has happened many times. The deaf have said, I can't stand that person. Do you want me to say? No, no, I can't. Oh, no, 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 they'll go for me. So I would go up and I would just say, this interpreter, I'm sorry, you would need to excuse that interpreter, not appropriate. And if they're complaining, I say, I'm sorry, this person's just not working. Okay, I want to ask you a question. I'll hold the questions for a moment. So, Craig, when you've been involved and became an intermediary, deaf intermediary, you have to have like a clear, conviction record, or if you've got like a speeding offence, would that exclude you from? Do you need to be a good boy, good girl? Can you tell me? Oh, Avril, you're absolutely right. In England, we have our DRB, and we in Scotland, you have a different system, but it is very, very strict, and it's every year. Sometimes it's every 3 years that you need this disclosure, but when you're doing deaf intermediate, it's every year. Speeding offences are not included. I admit I've speeded, but any other convictions that are relative would be. So we've got Linda Richards now with a question. Okay, so you see, Linda's question, good question. Deaf world can be very small, and you may, on occasion, bump into a person that you've spent an extensive time with. What do you do? And they bring up the case, and they might tell people around, oh, that's the person that helped me with this. What do you do in that situation? Oh, it happens. I just have to make sure and make clear with the deaf person beforehand that everything that we've discussed, that even if we bump again in the future, wherever, I will never acknowledge that person. If they said hello to me, I'd just say hello back, but I wouldn't engage in a conversation because I'm not the person who's going to be retelling your story in any form, and that's the way they can feel confident about it. But I'll be honest to you, it's not happened yet. I don't think so. Oh, wait a minute. Once I can remember something, whatever happened once, and it was fine. It went smoothly. But most of the time, you just sort of go on with it. Maybe the deaf world's bigger than we think. Maybe it is. But as you say, all of that is all discussed right at the beginning. So it's not a case of doing the journey and bye bye. People know what to expect. Expectations are managing. Now, for example, say it did happen, I've already got my tricks of the trade, which is they'll say, do you remember me? And I go, no. Oh, what happening? All right, okay, all right. And then you just play and get them to just understand in another way, not sure what's going on, and this is a public space. Craig, is there maybe a story? I mean, I'm not looking for anything in detail, obviously, but is there any sort of, I don't know, something you could share with our audience that an experience that's been so positive using having a deaf intermediary there? Do you know what? I've got one really good story, and it happened, 5 hours away. And I remember I was all prepared, everything to go and meet this person. I was going to meet them the next day. And it came back, they didn't want me to be there. And I was like, that's okay, that's fine. But inside, I had this weird feeling. I kept thinking, why? I really was thinking, try it. And I approached again and said, mm, he said, it's a serious crime. It's serious. So immediately in the back of my mind, I'm like, right, okay, I know this person. I know what they've been through. Problems after problems. If I go there, and I went to the door, opened the door, and the face was like that. Is he deaf? He's not deaf. And I was like, I'm deaf. You could see the confusion. And they sat down, and it just felt so good. So, because what had happened was there was too many interpreters and other people coming in. What had happened was the person didn't understand what the intermediary was. So there was just a gut feeling because I knew this person. I thought, why are they putting more barriers up for themselves? And I realised they didn't even understand it was the deaf. So the person, what you're saying really, Craig, is the person that was given her information about being able to access a deaf intermediary. She wasn't get that information right. So she didn't realise that she was just assumed that because they said someone with her, it would automatically be a hearing person that can they couldn't sign. So I always say to deaf people, it's important that you that I will make sure that they'll get that person. So I will say to a deaf person, do you want that person as the ultimate goal? Is that person who did this to you? Do you want them to go to the jail? And if they say yes, then that's what I'm saying. I'll say, well, I'm here with the police to support you to get that end. So I suppose, Craig, it's about the person. We need to understand the language, all the complexities of the language, empathy and knowledge. For me, it really um, is like, for example, like there's a lot of children that are maybe are victims because they're deaf. They don't have any communications. Deaf babies. I can be involved in things like that, and I have a very strong and powerful role in there. And the how they always say, parents never go to parents' evenings and things like that, and they would maybe use it court as that an excuse for being a negligent parent. But if I'm there, I'm able to say, wait a minute, the whole reason I wasn't at the parents' meetings because you didn't provide an interpreter. So there's all of these things that you make context out of that you can understand. Uh, and then, we were just able to explain how things actually work, you know. So maybe they've said, oh, the parents are screaming, using their voice and they're aggressive. Well, then it's my job to explain, you know, this is normal. How many interpreters have had deaf parents are known to their loud voices or deaf family, and it explains to people. I suppose what you're doing is you're changing someone's view or perception. Yeah, I'm opening it up, that absolutely. So, for me, it's always a case of making sure that, deaf people understand what's going on, and if they bring in a hearing person, they're always gonna come from a hearing perspective. So that's why a deaf person needs to come in. I will look at the psychologist's report, and I'll read it and making sure that everything's there, and you'll always see things like deaf people have very difficulty communicating. Well, my report will say the absolute opposite of that. The communication is absolutely superb. And then the judge will see that and go, okay, a minute, there's gaps. There's gaps in this. So I suppose your report is you're filling in all of the gaps. Absolutely, Afro. And making them point their minds in a different direction than they thought before. And maybe there's a name there. I've heard of that person's name maybe on a report, and I'll say, "Who's that?" And they'll maybe describe the person's how they look, but they can't remember their name, or they don't know how to finger spell the name. So you has to be someone who's qualified as well. Like so I'll check to make sure that the interpreter was there, was qualified. Would you believe it? We're really nearly at time. So really, Craig, an deaf intermediary is really suitable for any person of any age. Yep, absolutely. Any disability, anything at all. It's equitable to anyone. However, Avril, but, but, but there's a lot of hearing and deaf people with learning difficulties can't read, so communication is really important. So, and this is our human right. It is, Craig. Yes, absolutely. We have a right to be able to understand a process. Yeah, absolutely. It's there. I'll maybe try and sneak in another quick question because there's loads. And we've got a question now from Linda again. And Linda wants to ask, What would your tips be, Craig, for us to ensure that we had a deaf intermediary in Scotland? Oh, I'm absolutely sure, and everything that I'm saying and I have been saying, I really hope that that's given some thought to the importance of establishing a deaf intermediary within the Scottish court system. I mean, I said it's not just about the accused, it's a victim and its witness. All of that covers everything. And we have it, it works, and it is a benefit to everyone. So I think what you're saying, Craig, it's really for Scotland the best tip. What would you give us then? Would be your best tip? Well, I would just say, ask me to go and I'll come and give a presentation. I would not mind. I'd be delighted to do that. Well, yep, that's something that maybe the within the justice system they could look to the justice system in England and Wales and look for maybe mirroring or duplicating your model, and that in itself will be able to help our system in Scotland. And then maybe if you could identify the gaps that's in place in Scotland and how a deaf intermediary would be able to be the solution to those gaps, and it would then prevent cases just breaking down. And I think it would be lovely. And I think you're right, Craig. It would give the deaf opportunity, the same as their peers, access to fair justice. Only wanting the same. Exactly, Avro. Thank you. So interesting. It's not the judge or the sheriff's fault. They're just not aware. So it's my job to inform them as a trusted aid. It has actually been an hour. I know you can't believe it. It's just when I'm so pleased to have so many questions in for our deaf viewers. And I think it's important today to sort of start to open the discussion about what is a deaf intermediary, to really start that chatter. You know, we're now can ask the questions that maybe we didn't know before. You know, we've now it's happening in England, Wales. We can see there's precedent and we can see it's working, you know. So I absolutely appreciate your time, your experience, your passion, Craig. It's been wonderful. You gave us all so much food for thought and gave us some impetus for the future. Thank you so much. Oh, an absolute pleasure, Avro. Thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you again to our audience at home. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.